Hey everyone, welcome to the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning, mean to take family, school, community partnership to the next level. My name is Fan Xu, and I will be the moderator of today. This session is session 11, Authentically Engaging One Family at a Time. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. To ensure that all get the most out of today, we ask that all participants turn off their webcams and microphones. If you have questions for the presenters, please use the chat feature, and I will pass them along to at an appropriate time. You can also join the conversation at Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag Breakthrough2022 to share your thoughts. I will also paste the hashtag to our chat. All right, now I will give the time to our speakers today, Senika Bing and Grandma Wada Mariam. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seneca Bing, and I am one of the district family and community engagement coordinators. We see some friends here. Now, we know that we're in a unique situation. So we are just after lunch or right before lunch. So hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of the music that we had, and you'll enjoy the conversation that we have. We also want to make sure that you feel comfortable with questions and concerns and comments. I know that my view is spotlit, if that is the word, and so you can see me speaking. My friend and colleague, Garima Wada Mariam, will also be speaking. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself now, if you want to wait until the other time, the appropriate time.
Sure, I'll go ahead just real quick. Like my friend and colleague Seneca Bing said, my name is Garima Wada Mariam, and I have the great honor of presenting and co-hosting with her about some great and exciting things that we did in the district, Columbus City School District this past year. So since we have a lot of great info, I will go ahead and just pass the baton right back to her.
All right. Wonderful. So as always, we love to welcome you into the space. And so we always want to come with a warm spirit, and we want to make sure that we are welcoming you in a way that is most appropriate. So you'll see that we try many different languages and just ways to be able to do that. So welcome. Today, we're going to talk about authentically engaging one family at a time, and the initiative or effort that was a collaborative effort by a lot of people to be able to do that. So you see our names here, but by no means are we the only ones, because we have a wonderful team of 6 regional coordinators and awesome family ambassadors and bilingual engagement liaisons that all walk alongside each other and do this work together. So you see 2 faces, but no, there are many more that in our executive director, Scott Varner, that are doing this work. So we wanted to start with something a little fun, and we just want to hear in the chat, what is your preferred mode of communication? We know that we are talking about checking and connecting, and we'll get into that, but we want to know, how do you like for people to communicate with you? So if you just take a moment, and there's some options here. Other is there, so if there's something else, you can definitely put that in the chat also.
Yes, and I see. Oh, here we go. Face-to-face, phone calls. Ooh, a lot of face-to-face, phone calls, texting, face-to-face, text. No one likes a good old-fashioned note, huh? Email, texting, face-to-face, text, and email. Great, you have multiple ways. Someone said, depends on who it is.
Well.
Okay, there's another one. A lot of families like WhatsApp, class apps. Handwritten card in her box. That's excellent. Nice. Thank you, April. And someone just mentioned it depends on the circumstances. Ms. Bing, what is your favorite and preferred mode of communication?
I would have said hands down text initially. However, someone said a handwritten note in their box. And I know that when I worked in the building, it always meant something when a family would give me a note to say thank you, or a student. One year I was having a hard time and the students got together in the lunchroom and wrote like just a beautiful big banner, and they all signed it. Like that kind of stuff makes you feel great. So what about you, Fran?
I prefer text. I tell my friend all the time, by the end of my job, my words have been extinguished from my mouth. So I prefer texting. And so that's really great. It's short, it's sweet, and to the point.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for those that put that in the chat.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, so we're going to get into kind of the meat of why we're here. What we will do in this time together is really talk about the why. We always like to start with the why of the work that we are doing, because when times get hard, when you are in a situation where you are trying to figure things out, always going back to your why is critically important. So we will start there. Then we'll talk a little bit about Check and Connect, and we didn't want to just give you information. We wanted to kind of to bring you into the world of how we pull this piece together in the space with our ambassadors and our schools and all of that. And then we were able to really pull some information together in the form of data, right? Because we're in a data-driven world. But we also know that there's qualitative as well as quantitative data that we can pull from all interactions. And so we wanted to be able to do just that in this space. So when we think about our authentic engagement, our roadmap to Check and Connect, there were some really key parts, right? This goes into the why. We knew in the heart of COVID, there was a gap in communication, in being around each other, and just, we were home, we weren't able to really talk or see one another. And so in the heart of COVID, our team, the Department of Engagement at the time, started to think about all of the community partners that we had in our space. And they all wanted to help. They wanted to do something. And so there were many different efforts that were put together, but one was We Care Wednesday. And so it was an opportunity for 800 or so, right, volunteers to really come together and for us to leverage the collective strength of not only Columbus City Schools, but also the surrounding area and all of our partners and those folks that do great work with our students and families. And so we really wanted to think about, how do we reach out to our families? We can't really go to their house. We can't have the children in school, but what can we do? What is within our sphere of influence? And so what we knew is that we can make phone calls. And so Check and Connect, We Care Wednesday at that time was born. And at that time, we made over 15,000 calls. It was broken down into each person received a call or a list of 20 to 25 families that they would contact. It was not building specific, right? Now, we did have a couple of schools that said, hey, we'd like to call our schools, our students. And we tried to make that happen. But by and large, folks were getting lists of families to reach out to. One of the things that we did do was break our ESL families down so that we could make sure that we had a Spanish speaking community member or teacher. We had a lot of teachers. We had a lot of school staff. If they were Spanish speaking, if they were Somali, if they were Mai, we tried to break our list down so that we had the appropriate people calling, right, our families, but we wanted to make sure that they called nonetheless. There was a command center that was set up, and so there were very few people that would troubleshoot and try to answer any questions that came up. But we also had a lot of people calling and saying, I just want you to know that this family said something very positive about this teacher or this staff member. And so we tried to pass those messages along to the staffs also, because it was a hard time for everyone. And we really wanted to make sure that people knew that there were people rallying around them with those phone calls. So that was We Care Wednesday. But we also knew that we had a whole lot of seniors in high school that were missing their senior year. And so, and their families were also missing some of those senior things. And being a mother of a senior this year, it is an important deal. And it's something that we didn't take lightly. And so we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to our seniors and their families to make sure that their graduation agreements were signed. They knew what was going on. And there were very specific messages that were targeted to seniors in high school. And so again, it was revamped as you think about your data. We were talking about, the way that we look at data, we reflect, and then we figure out what do we need to do next. That We Care Wednesday for seniors was one of those things that came from those conversations. But then we knew, okay, we also need to do a little more because there are some families that we cannot reach. And so what do we do when we can't reach families by phone? So we were able to collaborate with the National Center for Urban Solutions, as well as our safety and security teams, and mobilize those folks to is what was called Operation Knock on Doors. And so it was a collaborative effort, but it was very intentional. As we were making the phone calls, if we couldn't reach the families, if families were in a space where they were becoming chronically absent and or there were just no communication, and then our attendance teams in the school would then complete a referral for one of these teams to go and to actually knock on the doors. And I would want to also say that our bilingual engagement liaisons were also knocking on doors at that time. And so they were also a group that we trained. We didn't have them listed here, but they were also instrumental in making sure that they were knocking on doors as well. So there was a whole concerted effort that was happening to try to reach our families. And then out of that, we started to think about, so I know that we will be back in school at some point and things will look a little different. What is our immediate sphere of influence? And then what could we do to make a staple program for family ambassadors, which is within our immediate sphere of influence? And so that's where Check and Connect was born. And so it was implemented or led by 100 plus building-based English-speaking and bilingual family ambassadors, but our bilingual engagement liaisons also helped in these efforts. When you receive this PowerPoint here on the bottom, you could see those small circles. The Check and Connect training will lead you back to this. It's hyperlinked, and then there's a sample phone script that is also there, and we'll get more into those parts. And so we talked a little bit about the why, but by and large, the why was to connect our families, right? We wanted to just call and check and connect to see how they were doing. We also wanted to be able to connect families to resources, right? We know that the whole child we needed to pay attention to the whole child. And so really looking at those educational, nutritional, physical, mental health needs. We never knew what would come from those conversations, but we wanted to make sure that we were providing as many resources as we could. And then we wanted to make sure that our families knew what was happening with the district. And so it was an opportunity to share that important information with them as well. And then we talked about We Care Wednesday. I will not rehash it or go through it, but this is just some additional information. Again, it was a part of the COVID-19 response. We wanted to make sure, but there were several schools, again, that from that effort wanted to continue the effort with their buildings, and they did. And let me just say, we are by no means saying that one Wednesday was the one time that people were receiving communication. We knew that our buildings and staffs were communicating, or at least attempting to communicate with families. We wanted to, with We Care Wednesday, leverage the support of the community that was wanted to pour into our families as well. So what is Check and Connect, right? What is the plan? In terms of Check and Connect, last year, we're going to go by our last year's reports. family ambassadors were to make 20 to 25 calls. And then we started to really think about, well, when could those calls be made, right? We don't want them too early or too late, but we know that not all families are home at the same time or will answer the phones at the same time. And so there was kind of a time frame that the calls were made between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. according to what the data says from that particular school. And then again, it was to provide resources. And one of the major things was the documentation. So we wanted to make sure that we were documenting and understanding what families were saying. And so those reports were pulled pretty regularly by our regional family engagement coordinators. And we were able to really look at what the data was saying as it related to Check and Connect. And then in terms of how, right, the family ambassadors received the roster of the phone numbers and I'm not sure if email addresses, but at least phone numbers from their regional family engagement coordinators. They were able to work with the principals and or designated staff member to think about what families it was most appropriate to call at that time. And so maybe it was our kindergarten families, our sixth grade families, our ninth grade families, because they were in that pivotal transition period, or maybe it was something else, but really making sure that they were communicating with the building on when it was most appropriate to contact families or which families to contact. We also created a resource tree because as the conversations were happening, sometimes there was a referral or a connection that needed to be made with someone in the building. But we wanted our family ambassadors to know what these people did, right? And so when would it be appropriate for them to connect with the school counselor or a school social worker or a psychologist or whomever as a result of that call. And so that resource tree kind of helped to identify those folks. Of course, the necessary follow-up. And then that work was in conjunction again with our bilingual engagement liaisons. And they would help to support where there was a language need. So you may have heard me say that we have bilingual family ambassadors. And so we do have them in some of our buildings, but not all. And so our engagement liaisons are able to help us make additional contact with families when there is a language barrier. And now I believe I am turning it over to my friend Garima, who will take us through the rest of the presentation.
All right. Thank you. And I wanted to shout out some places: Colorado, Connecticut, Centerburg. Thank you for joining us from your different places and school districts. I wanted to pause before we went on with this to talk about, you've heard us talk about family ambassadors. Many of the family ambassadors, as Seneca said, are on here, and they are initially really the bedrock of this family engagement work that we do. And they are bridge builders, they're connectors, and they're really those liaisons where families lean on, and they help to make a lot of home to school and school to home connections. And so we're really thankful that we have them. When Seneca and I began this work 7 and 6 years ago, we had somewhere around 40, 50, all the way up to 70. Now we are proud to be able to say that we have at least one family ambassador in almost every school in the district. We have 109 schools, and some schools even are lucky enough to have 2 family ambassadors, whether based on population, whether based on school language needs. So again, the program is growing. And again, it is because we have been able to acquire data and show how worthy the family ambassadors are to this essential work that we do. We also, yes, thank you. As we grew in numbers in the building, we also grew in numbers here in our department as well. Along with Seneca and I being district level coordinators, we were lucky enough to add also 6 regional coordinators. Our district is currently divided up into 6 regions, mostly by geographic area. And so these regional engagement family coordinators have been really a blessing and a gift to us and the work, again, because they're able to provide more appropriate support and supervision to each of about 20 to 25 schools that are in their region. So wanted just to mention that before we go on and talk more logistics. Oh, a question. Are they full-time? We would like them to be, but no, they're not. I will say, a lot of them work many, many hours, but at this time, they are asked to work about 20 to 25 hours a week, whereas before, again, another win, we were only able to have them work. Well, let me say this. We were only able to pay them for 10 hours of work, but we really went back with a lot of our executive directors and folks and really showed that they were spending a lot more than 10 hours a week in the building. They were actually putting in about 20 to 25. So that was another win for us, is to actually get them paid and be respectful of their time so that they get that. I'm not sure if are the family ambassador volunteer? No, they are paid positions. Yes, they get a stipend, a yearly stipend. Yes, and are paid $25 per hour for that. All right, so to go a little bit more into the logistics, so again, in thinking about this plan, it's one thing to think about, okay, let's do this, let's reach out, let's check in, let's connect with our families, but we wanted to really be strategic and intentional about the effort, so we really had to sit down and brainstorm what this would look like. And when you see a phone script, you might think, oh gosh, you're telling them what to say. It's really more of a matter of having some go-tos. So what are some things as I'm calling, some things to remember, to mention? So like things like school name, things like, your school and some other connections. So in no way, shape, or form did we want to mandate a connection that our family ambassadors are fully capable of making, but we wanted to provide just a minimum standard of sample conversations that could have. If you've ever worked in telecommunications, you practice with different scripts and different modes so that you are able to collect and get the information that's necessary to analyze. So we did this with the training and had this for them, but our family ambassadors are more than talented and able to connect with our families. So many of them probably did not need this. Next slide, my friend. All right. So we touched upon a little bit of this, but again, and me being a parent as well of 4 children, I know that a lot of times when I'm struggling, that is not the time when I want to get a phone book out. And yes, I'm dating myself with a phone book, but I don't want to go through and search and, go through and call 20, 30 different places of where I can receive help for me and my children. So one of the things that the family ambassadors made sure to do was to also have lists of go-tos. So who are those housing and utility assistance folks? Where are the mental health resources in our community that really can be some quick help to our families? As you know, the gamut, we had to run the gamut with COVID because COVID presented a lot of needs, and it actually put a spotlight on a lot of the gaps and inequities that we have in society. And so they had to be ready at the go with some resources. One of the things that we did as an exercise during the training was to role play. And I know how much my friend Seneca Bing loves to role play. But as a teacher, that seeing something and reading something is one thing, but our regional engagement coordinators got really great at this as they did this specific training. And I remember receiving practice calls actually, on my cell phone from family ambassadors calling to practice. So I had to pretend to be the quote unquote struggling parent. I had to pretend to be a difficult parent. And then obviously the one where no one answers, but we wanted to give them again some practice so that they can get some muscle memory into what do you say? What could you say? And give them some tips and strategies. If you gave a call like this and received a parent. And I want to say, just as a caveat to this, although we have difficult and struggling, what I know from my 21 years of this work, a lot of times we present as difficult when we are struggling. or it's a defense mechanism, right? So we also recognized and had to have that conversation about there's no one that just answers the phone to be difficult, right? Most people are not trying to give you a hard time, but a lot of times people are where they are. And so meeting people where they are, even if you need to give people a moment just to say, okay, this is what I was going to say. What do you need? How can I help you? Like, let me be a person who can just listen and be quiet. And so all of these, again, come from experiences of working with individuals and working with people. So that was very important and very meaningful. The coordinators really did a great job with this part. These are just the different examples. Again, I won't, spend too much time on it, but we did take time to go through each one of those. And how to document. So again, to give you a little bit of backstory, and some of you that are in these positions similar to us, you know that oftentimes your upper ups will ask you, where's the data? Where's the data? What data do you have? What can we even keep in terms of family engagement? So one of the things that the coordinators were able to come up with was to create a Google form that would help the family ambassadors to document this. Now, this had many different iterations because, as you know, anytime you create a prototype, you go back, or let me say this, when you create a prototype, it is a good practice, right, to go back and see what worked well, what didn't work well, and what changes need to be made. Now, for data purposes, we couldn't change too much because, again, we wanted to compare apples to apples. But I will say that information that they collected from the families were things like what region, what school, their student name, phone number, addresses. If you're like us, we are a very transient population. And so this actually even helped a lot of our family ambassadors to get the correct phone numbers from families, to help them to be able to go in and correct their addresses in what we call Parent Portal or Infinite Campus. Because again, when you're moving, sometimes you don't remember to give or update your information. So that was another thing that was tracked. Some of the big things that were tracked were, is there anything you're struggling with this at this time? And if so, what kinds of things are you struggling with? And then making a connection of who they could help. This next slide was Seneca references a little bit, the resource connection tree. So one of the things that we really talk about with the family ambassadors is this misconception that they are the one-all, be-all solution to family engagement. That is not the case. They're the important part. They are an important part to the puzzle. But one of the things that we're trying to tackle with our district is having everyone in buildings understand that everyone has a part to play, whether it's our custodians, secretaries, teachers, principal, everyone's work is family engagement and how we engage families. So one of the important things then, if they're an important part of this puzzle, they need to know the puzzle pieces. So we had them fill out this, it was blank and empty, a template, and it was called just people to know, or know your people. This, just to give credit, this was from a former family ambassador. She used to do this, Northland High School. Shout out to Beth Maston. She was phenomenal and shared a lot of these things. And one of the things that she would spotlight in her newsletter was make a little section that would spotlight the school counselor and told what they do. Because many of you, if you might not know, what does an occupational therapist do? What does a speech and language therapist do? So it gave that person a little bit of shine and the ability to see what they do and have parents be able to possibly connect to them. Because again, there's so many people in buildings and we don't always know who to reach out to. So this helped our family ambassadors to kind of figure out, okay, well, if a family asks for help with testing, I can go to the school counselor or psychologist and they can make that connection. And Seneca, please stop me if there are any questions that you want me to verbally tackle. I see one about a family ambassador requirements. If I can hold off on that and come back to that in just a moment, I will write it down and I'll talk about that in just a second.
I did put the CCS website, Family Ambassador. It's serving as a family ambassador is the title, but it takes you to our Columbus City Schools website to kind of give you an idea of what we're asking, but there's so much more.
Okay. No, and actually this is perfect because again, we were talking about shifts and how our department has grown. That was actually a big win for us as well. In the past, you had to be a family member or a parent, like a parent or guardian of a Columbus City School student in order to be a family ambassador, which was fantastic. That is perfect. But we also saw the need for community members that were really passionate about contributing and helping build parent capacity to be on board and be a family ambassador. So we talked to some people, we begged, we pleaded, and so we were able to make this change happen. So now if you look at our number of family ambassadors that are on board with us, you have people that work in different agencies and organizations, a lot of social, social work type of work, nonprofits, people from faith-based industry. So we really have a great amount of diversity of thought and ability, which, as you guys know, always contributes to an organization. So with Lutheran Social Services, Seneca mentioned We Care Wednesday. This was an organization that originally partnered with us, and they were able to be on board at that time. And when the folks that were making the phone calls, the volunteers, were referring people for certain amounts of help or certain things, they would refer them to this line, 211. It was similar to like a 911 or 411. You would call and then families could get connected to different services. We still had those on board, but what we learned was that as our families built up, or as our family ambassadors built up their repository or networks of connections, they were able to connect them to more specific organizations directly or people in the building. Another important thing to consider, as you know, as we are individuals that work in buildings, and this is something that you may consider if you ever choose to do something like this, is to talk about mandated reporting and confidentiality. So we went through with the family ambassadors training on confidentiality and what information can be shared or cannot be shared, and then the duty to report that talks about suspicions of abuse or neglect. And the difference between, for example, I'm very open in sharing that my children have special needs, that we shouldn't be calling and saying, hi, I know your child has autism, yada, 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 right? It's different since I've mentioned it now. I've opened the doors for you to now talk to me about that, but it's very important to make that distinguished, to distinguish that. So that was a part of their training. All right, the good stuff here. So you heard a little bit about where we came from, what was kind of the impetus for this, the seeds. You heard a little bit about the procedures and how we did this. So now what, right? So we've got all this data. We also had all this information. What do we do with it and how do we move forward? So I'll also mention to you all that quarterly, the regional engagement coordinators would take time, and I know if you saw their faces on here, it was quite a bit of data. I remember those days when they went through and they were running reports and analyzing those reports to be able to identify the important pieces of information to pull out so that we could share with our superiors and our directors and executive directors. So the big number that should be screaming out to you is 18,690. So from the moment we started in November until May, June 1st, June 2nd is when we closed, somewhere around there, the family ambassadors were able to make 18,690 phone calls. And I'll let that simmer with you for a moment. Because if you go to the outcomes, okay, which is right next to that, you'll notice that there are 47%, so about 48%, actually 47% of families actually answer their phones, which if you have ever been, unfortunately, there's sometimes is a cynicism associated with reaching out to families, and there can be this tale of, oh, well, families don't answer their phones. They don't answer when we call. Well, we had data that said otherwise. I mean, close to 50% of the time, someone was answering the phone for our family ambassadors. And then a smaller percentage after that, about 35%, left a message. So again, one thing that I would like to know further, if you're a person that's inquisitive like me, is from those individuals who left a message, how many of those folks actually called back as well? Because I would venture to say that when you leave a voicemail message saying, I'm calling from the school, just checking in with you, some of those folks are going to call you back. So those were the numbers of calls and the effects of the outcomes. What were the discussion, right? What did people talk about? The top 3 categories, and this would be pretty much, if you talk to our coordinators, they would tell you that every time, pretty much, the discussion revolved around academics and tutoring, which was 14% of all the categories, Infinite Campus or parent portal, and then attendance was the third, with 6%, and Infinite Campus was 12. So if you add all that up, you're looking at almost half of the conversations, a little bit less than half, are revolving around that. So if you've got this rich data, we don't just sit on it. We couldn't just sit on it. We had to do something about it. What did we do? How do we leverage this information? So oftentimes, and this is where our conversations as coordinators and regional coordinators came in, we took this information to our directors and executive directors and also area superintendents and said, okay, look, our families are really struggling to make sense of this thing called Infinite Campus. And they have been for a while, if I can say. So what do we do about that, right? So what, now what? Academics seems to be the number one lingering thing that people are struggling with. Again, rightfully so. Report cards came out yesterday for the state of Ohio. And I would venture to say that they didn't look as good as previous years to COVID. So what do we do about that? One of the things that was really pivotal to me that Seneca and I talked a lot about when we were coming back from COVID was, okay, so we're coming back from this crazy time. We've been virtual. Families have been really stressed out. We can't go back to things as normal and as usual. And so if we come back and the expectation is, okay, let's go, we will have missed an opportunity to really reconnect with kids and reconnect with families. And those of you that are from different school districts, you probably, without even saying, I would venture to guess that most districts got pressure to say, go, and go. And I think that's a missed opportunity, if I can say. So for me, now that these report cards are out, I can honestly say to you, academics is very important. But you cannot teach children that show up to your door that are carrying a heavy book bag. We have to help them unpack that book bag to be able to learn. And so that's something that we are going to recommend. I know our side of the house is going to recommend and talk to and continue talking to with our PBIS folks, with our social emotional learning practitioners, and with our academic side of the house.
And if I might just jump in for a second, friend, and the former school counselor in me says we cannot neglect the educators who also have heavy backpacks that need to be unpacked. And so as we are having these conversations, because we have a unique opportunity to walk alongside our social emotional learning practitioners, our positive behavior intervention support, like PBIS coordinators, but really starting to show this rich data and talk about what are some of the things that we need to do as a whole school community to heal. Because it's not just our students, it's not just our families. A lot of our teachers are also parents, and they're caring, or administrators, right? And so how do we use this data to leverage what we know needs to happen in our school district?
Absolutely. And we do want to acknowledge and tell a couple, I'm kind of the storyteller around these parts, but we wanted to acknowledge 6 schools that reached out to their families over 500 times, and they're listed here. It's really small, but if you have the PowerPoint presentation or the slide deck in front of you, one was Columbus Afrocentric, Eakin Elementary, Forest Park Elementary, Georgian Heights Elementary, Salem Elementary, and Woodcrest Elementary. So definitely shout out to them. I know there were a couple family ambassadors who also reached out to every single family and then started again. I know off the top of my head, I think it was Sylvia Skipper from Northgate and Tiffany Edwards from Avalon. So, and if I'm missing anyone, please, we'd love to brag and boast about you. Please drop that in the chat as well. Some of the other things that this data didn't tell, but anecdotally, they told us through their family ambassadors. Some of the high school family ambassadors shared with us that this was incredible because sometimes as their kids get older, they felt disconnected. And they were not feeling as if they were feeling connected the older their kids got. So I know, thank you. Thank you, Tony and Mitwa from Eakin. Thank you very much. So one of our high schools, Briggs High School, two of the family ambassadors worked in conjunction. Our My speaking families, which we have a significant population of Somali families in Columbus, Ohio, actually the second largest in the nation with over 70,000 Somali members in this area. So in conjunction with our English speaking family ambassador and our My speaking family ambassador, they made calls to the families and they documented and they said that they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt connected when otherwise they didn't in years before. Again, lots of other similar stories that we could share with you. Yes, a key takeaway, lots of rich data, lots of connections, and lots of things to learn. I'm not going to spend too much time on the summer report here, but I will also tell you because of the success of the work during the school year, the Columbus City Schools has a summer program called the Summer Experience, which is actually many families really enjoy that. A lot of students enjoy that. It's not a remedial summer program only. It is for those that need remediation, but it also provides enrichment. And so that's something that's changed within the district. Also, a lot of hands-on work, a lot of community partners that contribute to the summer experience. But in essence, our family ambassadors that worked over the summer were able to reach 851 families. And also nearly on this data, nearly 90% of families knew how to log into Infinite Campus, which is great out of those families that were reached. So again, we have some work ahead of us and some things, but now again, we know which directions to go, right? Instead of just guessing. Thank you, friend. Next slide. So that leads right into the questions, right? So what does Check and Connect look like moving forward? So we're having a lot of discussions in-house about how does this program work beyond a virtual setting or beyond a time when many families were not able to come into the building. And I will say, I have to give a shout out to our family ambassadors because they help us, since they are the boots on the ground, they really help us to keep a pulse of, what is really happening. And so the need for change is apparent. Is it appropriate to continue making 20 to 25 phone calls when you have a lot of families coming in for different events? Does that need to change? How would we document those changes? So these are some lingering questions that have come up. And again, just like any good educator, you do progress monitoring. So we have to stop and monitor our progress, look at what's working, look at what's not working, and make changes. The main point that I do want to we want to leave with you is we're not going to stop connecting with our families. We're not going to stop checking in on our families. But what does that look like moving forward? And how do we make, how do we make best use or be as efficient with our time and with the family ambassadors' time? So,
and one thing that I wanted to say is as you're thinking about, because a lot of times we get a lot of questions about how do you measure family engagement besides who comes in the door, like what do you do? So one way that we were even able to measure today was asking you, how do you like, what forms of communication do you like? So we're able to take that back and say, hey, we have a group here that we spoke to, and here are some ways that they also like to communicate. And so as we're thinking about, again, how do we communicate with our families beyond just the telephone? We can use this data to say a lot of people like text messages. Some people like this, or some people like that. And so again, really just these informal pieces of information can help give you some rich data as you are trying to make decisions.
Yes, and Miss Melissa Gibson, thank you for the compliment. I wish I could take credit for that great impact report. I will give a shout out to, her name is Dr. Amanda Klein-Cox. She is someone that we contracted work with and will continue to contract with. She's a data analyst and is working with us to, again, one of the things, again, if you are in this work, you work to show the rest of the district the credibility and the fact that we are the thread that binds, right? When you have family engagement, when you have culture and climate and connections, academics can happen, right? This is the foundation for everything to be able to happen. So we are trying to make sure that we've got our data piece so that when we are a part of the planning table, we've got our numbers as well. And it's not just stories and anecdotes, but there are hard numbers and data along with it. So,
and I'm sorry, we tag team a lot.
Yep.
One of the things that we will also say is it was important for us, again, we try to be intentional in our decision to do things. It was important to work with Dr. Klein-Cox because she had held a position just like ours as a family engagement coordinator in a different district. And she really loves data. And so she's able to help us to tell the family engagement story with data and how to pull some of those pieces out that will be impactful for a district and to really think about. So it's good to have someone that loves data, but also understands the programmatic piece of the work so that you can have that conversation specifically around the standards that we use for family engagement to drive our work. So I wanted to point that little piece out to them.
And sorry, my editing eyes see an error on this page. It should say for the 2022-2023 school year. So forgive that, but we will make sure that's corrected and make sure that you get a cleaner version of this. We want to go ahead and stop now and see if there are any questions. Yes, thank you. Thank you all. But we wanted to stop and see if there are any other questions about our work, with Check and Connect, family ambassadors, family engagement, anything at all. All right. Well, if you have any questions, we will make sure to put our emails in the chat, and you can feel free to reach out to us. We love collaborating with other school districts and talking about best practices, working smarter, not harder. So please feel free to reach out to us if you would like. Yes, Miss Lynn Shields, please pick our brains. We love to work with other folks on how to help all kids.
So I had to just say this. I see a Sandra Judge in here, and I never see judges. So my maiden name is Judge. So I had to point that out because I never see judges. Thank you for being with me.
Oh, and I see someone else coming in that's you'll know. So yes, thank you all. Yes, thank you, Cleveland. We've been up to Cleveland. They're doing some great work up there. We'd love to talk with you. Please feel free to email us. Seneca, go ahead, put your email in the chat because I know they'd rather type your email than my big old long last name. I do want to also give a shout out to our executive director, Scott Varner. He wasn't able to be with us, but he helps to lead this work in our department, along with Scott Wortman, who is our chief of communications and engagement. So shout out to them. Shout out to our 6 coordinators who are on here. Thank you all. Thank you, family ambassadors, and keep doing the hard work that everyone is doing to help benefit students and families. Have a good one.
Okay, thank you, Grandma and Seneca, for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. Please join me in thanking our presenters in the chat. I already see a lot of chat thanking for your time and knowledge. Yeah, and there will be several minutes left, so I will keep this session longer to wait for more questions, thoughts, or concerns, everything. So if this is your final session for today, please be sure to take the survey by following the link. I will share the link into our chat.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
Canada. I love Canada. Welcome. Thank you. Texas as well. I saw a question that just came by. The question, I believe, Naomi, we have almost 50% of Spanish-speaking families. They love to have our Hispanic meetings. What's your opinion about having a separate meeting for them? So I don't know if I mentioned this, but I am also an English learner. I came to the United States 40 years ago. So one of our favorite things to say in this department is both and. I think there is value in having our families learn with English learners or with English-speaking families, but there's also room for having our families just hear things in Spanish. Two things. Again, being an East African, there are many things that my family and I did not know that we didn't know. So if we had only stayed with our Eritrean families and only learned from them, there are a lot of goings on that we wouldn't have learned. When you're new to a land, right, there's a rhythm, there's a rhyme that you need to learn, and you don't always learn it from just being around your people or people that speak your language. I had to learn everything from being outside my home as well. So I say that as an analogy. It's important to try to do both. Yes, integration is very important because then you get the best of both worlds and know how to speak two languages and know two cultures. Thank you. Thank you, Tricia. We hope you have a good rest of your session. I think there's one more left. If you have any more questions, we have a few more minutes.
All right, I sent the survey link again into the chat because somebody mentioned this is the old one was not working, so I sent a new one. So this is important. I think the survey will be used to administer contact hours, so it is critical that you take the survey if seeking credit. So and the next session will begin at 2 p.m. So remember to keep the conversation going on Twitter using our hashtag. I will also copy and paste the hashtag into our chat. Okay, so and visit our website for any information about today's event.
Yes, and just another shout out, if you don't mind. I see a couple people from our Family Engagement Advisory on here as well. Giovanna Tyree, welcome, and shout out to you from Early Childhood. Tina Wallace from Special Ed. And I saw Katie Lavera. I think she was on here as well. Okay. Yes. Okay. So that's something new that we've started too. Again, we have many coordinators that work around the topic of family engagement. Therefore, we thought, let's work smarter. So we, towards the middle to end of last year, started getting together and talking about how we could coordinate our efforts better and more strategically. Thank you. And Tricia, if I'll read your comment there, Tricia is a family ambassador at Indianola Informal, one of our K-8 schools. She wrote, Check and Connect has been helpful in planning family engagement events and discussion forums. Great for getting feedback from families. Thank you for that.
Well, we know we have 5 minutes left, but we definitely don't want to stand in the way of you in a few minutes before the next session. So please feel free to stay on or and ask any questions that you have. But please don't feel obligated to stay for the last few minutes.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes left. So I will keep the session until 1:45, but feel free to take a real break before next session. Yeah, it is really a great session. I've learned a lot, and I'm so impressed by the report at the end of the presentation. Data does really help us to summarize previous work and help us to think about next steps.